My husband looked me in the eye across our dinner table at 11 Madison Park and said, "I'm leaving you for someone younger, someone who actually understands ambition." Behind him, his assistant, 26 years old, wearing a dress I'd paid for, smiled. What he didn't know was that I'd already liquidated our accounts, transferred our properties, and contacted every person who needed to know the truth. By the time dessert arrived, his entire empire was collapsing. My name is Catherine Ashford, and I spent 15 years building a life that looked perfect from every angle. My husband, Michael Ashford, was a real estate developer. Not just any developer, the kind of developer who built iconic properties. The Ashford Towers in Manhattan, the Ashford Residences in Tribeca, the Ashford Estate developments across the tri-state area. Michael's name was on buildings. His face was in business magazines. He was the kind of man who walked into rooms and people stood up. I met him at a charity gala in 2009. He was 35, already successful. I was 28, working as an interior designer for high-end Manhattan clients. He watched me across the room for half an hour, then walked over and said, "I'm going to marry you. Fair warning." I should have recognized that as a red flag. That kind of certainty, that kind of assumption that things would bend to his will. But instead, I heard it as confidence, romance, the certainty of a man who knew what he wanted. We were married 18 months later in the Hamptons. 200 guests, Vera Wang dress. The wedding photographer was the same person who'd photographed the royal wedding. Michael's wedding gift to me was a 5-carat graph diamond. "For the woman who completed my empire," he'd said. The irony of that statement would take 15 years to fully crystallize. For those 15 years, I built the life Michael wanted. I quit my design career to focus on our family vision. I redecorated our penthouse on the Upper East Side, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. I organized his business events, charmed his clients, wore the right clothes, said the right things. I was the perfect accessory to a powerful man's life. We had 2 children, Michael Jr., now 13, and Emma, now 11. Both attended the most exclusive private schools. Both had tutors and music lessons and every advantage money could provide. I was a present mother, present in the way wealthy mothers are present, meaning I was there for the important events while housekeepers and nannies handled the daily work. Michael was a present father in that same way. He loved his children when they were winning awards or doing something impressive. When they simply existed as ordinary kids with ordinary problems, he was usually traveling for work. By 2023, I'd become the kind of woman who existed to maintain an appearance. Pilates 3 times a week, hair appointments monthly, skincare treatments bi-weekly, designer clothes selected to project the right message. I'm beautiful enough to deserve this man, but not so beautiful that I outshine him. I was 43 years old, and I'd spent the past 15 years erasing myself. The first crack in the facade appeared at a fundraiser in March 2023. I noticed Michael's assistant, Natasha Volkov, for the first time that night. She was 26, Russian, with the kind of delicate beauty that makes people stare. She worked in Michael's office as his executive assistant, a title I'd always found amusing because she seemed to spend more time selecting Michael's lunch than managing his calendar. At the fundraiser, I watched Michael introduce her to people. I watched his hand linger on the small of her back. I watched him laugh at her jokes that weren't particularly funny, with the kind of attention he hadn't given me in 5 years. I didn't confront him. Instead, I watched. Being married to a man like Michael teaches you that confrontation is a luxury you can't afford. He was the power in our dynamic. He controlled the money, the properties, the social access. If I accused him of something and I was wrong, I'd look paranoid. If I was right, what was I going to do? Leave a man who controlled my entire life. So I did what I'd learned to do. I observed. I pulled our joint credit card statements. Michael had a secondary card in Natasha's name. I found charges at the Peninsula Hotel in Midtown, charges at Balthaser Restaurant, charges at jewelry stores, over $40,000 in a single month. I found hotel key cards in Michael's desk drawer. The Peninsula, room 2847, multiple dates over the past 6 months. I found text messages between Michael and Natasha on the iPad he sometimes left in the living room. When can you tell her? I'm tired of hiding. Soon, I promise. Soon we'll have our real life. I love you. I want to be your real wife, not just your office secret. Real wife, not just office secret. The casual way she'd written that, like being Michael's wife was the goal she'd been working toward, like I was simply the temporary obstacle in her path to his wealth and status. I didn't cry. Crying would have required me to feel something genuine, and after 15 years of performing, I'd forgotten how to access genuine emotion. Instead, I did what my father had taught me to do. I protected myself. My father was a corporate lawyer who specialized in financial litigation. He'd taught me as a child that the world was a game played with documents and information. Knowledge is power, he'd say, but only if you document it and only if you use it strategically. I'd spent 15 years learning to be the perfect wife. I was about to spend the next few months learning to be something else entirely. I hired a private investigator. Not to confirm what I already knew Michael was having an affair, but to build a comprehensive file that would hold up in court. The PI, a woman named Sandra Wu, was thorough. She provided photos of Michael and Natasha entering the Peninsula Hotel, multiple dates. Photos of them leaving the hotel together, affectionate, hand in hand. Timeline documentation showing hotel check-ins, correlating with times Michael told me he was at business meetings. Screenshots of their text messages, obtained legally through means I didn't ask about. Bank statements showing Natasha's expensive lifestyle, clearly funded by Michael. Evidence that Michael had been moving money into accounts held in Natasha's name. The total amount Michael had transferred to Natasha over the past 8 months, $680,000. While I'd been maintaining our household, raising our children, and being the decorative piece that completed his image, Michael had been systematically transferring marital assets to his 26-year-old mistress. But that was just the beginning of what I discovered. I hired a forensic accountant, someone my father recommended, a woman named Dr. Patricia Lin who specialized in complex financial fraud. Dr. Lin analyzed Michael's business accounts, his property holdings, his investment portfolios, and his personal finances. What she found was staggering. Michael had been using company money for personal purchases. He'd been running questionable financial structures through his developments. He'd been using shell companies to hide assets. None of it was technically illegal. Michael had good lawyers, but it was all ethically gray, professionally risky, and completely unknown to his business partners, his investors, or his wife. Dr. Lin compiled a 300-page report documenting every irregularity. She quantified how much of Michael's wealth came from these questionable structures. She identified the investors who didn't know what was happening with their money. She created a timeline of payments and transfers that painted a picture of a man who'd built his empire on accounting tricks and hidden financial structures. If this information became public, Dr. Lin said carefully, your husband's business would face significant scrutiny, potentially federal scrutiny. I didn't smile, but internally I was beginning to understand the power I'd been accumulating. I also hired a divorce attorney, Rebecca Chen, a partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. I walked into her office with Sandra Wu's PI report, Dr. Lin's forensic accounting analysis, and copies of every text message, every hotel receipt, every bank transfer. Rebecca reviewed the materials for an hour without speaking. When she finally looked up, she said, "Your husband has been committing fraud, both in his business and in his personal finances. He's been systematically transferring marital assets to his mistress. He's been concealing business improprieties from his partners, and he has no idea you know any of this." "Correct," I said. "What do you want?" Rebecca asked. "I want to protect my children. I want to ensure they're financially secure. I want my husband to face consequences for what he's done, and I want to do it in a way that he never sees coming." Rebecca smiled. "Then here's what we're going to do." What Rebecca outlined for me over the next hour was brilliant. It wasn't just a divorce strategy. It was a comprehensive dismantling of Michael's carefully constructed empire. "First," Rebecca said, "we're going to send a demand letter to Michael's business partners outlining the financial irregularities we've discovered. We'll make it clear that we're prepared to share this information with their investors, their boards, and federal authorities if they don't cooperate with our divorce settlement terms." "That's blackmail," I said. "No," Rebecca replied. "That's leverage. Blackmail is demanding money for silence. What we're doing is demanding that business leaders act responsibly when presented with evidence of fraud. If they choose to address the fraud instead of involving you, that's their choice." "And second," I asked. "Second, we're going to file for divorce in a way that freezes all of Michael's accounts and business interests until the settlement is complete. We'll cite financial misconduct and asset concealment as grounds for the freeze. We'll request that all of Michael's business records be provided as discovery. We'll subpoena his accountants. We'll make sure every questionable transaction he's ever made is documented and exposed." "And third," I pressed. "Third, we're going to contact Natasha Volkov's immigration attorney. And yes, she has one, because she's on a work visa sponsored by Michael's company, which is a whole other layer of fraud. And we're going to suggest that she might want to cooperate with authorities about her relationship with Michael. We'll make it clear that if she continues to accept money from marital assets, she becomes complicit in that fraud." Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "In other words, Catherine, we're going to make sure your husband understands that the game is over before he even knows he's playing it." 16/30/22/00. I spent 6 weeks building my case. I met with Dr. Lin's team weekly. I provided Sandra Wu with additional questions and investigation targets. I worked with Rebecca on the specific language of letters and legal documents. I copied files. I documented everything. I created secure cloud backups of every piece of evidence. I also did something else. I quietly moved money. Not illegally. I consulted with Rebecca about what I could legally do, and she was very precise about the boundaries. I liquidated my own inheritance, money that had never been part of marital assets because I'd kept it separate per my father's advice. I transferred my personal savings to a new account in my name only. I moved jewelry that had been gifted to me specifically by my parents into a safe deposit box registered only in my name. I also contacted a real estate attorney and began the process of documenting which properties were marital assets and which had been purchased with separate property funds. I separated my finances from Michael's to the degree legally possible. By the time I was ready to confront Michael, I'd essentially separated myself from him financially without him knowing it. Michael, meanwhile, continued his life completely unaware of what was happening. He was spending more time with Natasha, coming home later, lying more transparently about where he'd been. He'd stopped even trying to maintain the appearance of fidelity. He seemed to assume I was either blind or didn't care. The arrogance of it was almost beautiful. On June 15th, 2023, I received a call from Rebecca. "Your husband just transferred another $150,000 to Natasha's account. He also just signed a letter of intent to purchase a penthouse in Tribeca, a $12 million property, and he's listed Natasha as the co-buyer. He's using marital funds to buy property for his mistress, I said. Yes, which means we have fresh evidence of active fraud, and it means he's getting comfortable. He's getting sloppy. He thinks he's won. This is the perfect moment to strike. I'd planned to confront Michael on a Thursday evening in July, but he saved me the trouble. He came home at 6 p.m., still dressed in his business suit, and asked me to sit down in the living room. Michael rarely asked for my attention. Sitting down meant something was about to happen. "I'm leaving you," he said without preamble. "Natasha and I are going to be married. I've already told the children." He'd told the children before telling me. That detail would have hurt a year earlier. Now it just confirmed what I'd already understood. Michael had never seen me as a real person. I was infrastructure in his life, useful, decorative, easily replaced. "Okay," I said calmly. He seemed surprised by my lack of reaction. "That's it, okay. No tears, no drama." "What would drama accomplish?" I replied. "You've made your choice. I'm simply accepting your decision." "I knew you'd understand eventually," Michael said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. "I worried you'd fight me on this, but you've always been reasonable. That's one of the things I love about you. You don't create problems." The thing he loved about me was my compliance, my ability to accept mistreatment without complaint, my willingness to erase myself for his comfort. "I have a few questions," I said, pulling out a folder I'd prepared. "About what?" Michael asked, suddenly wary. "About the $680,000 you've transferred to Natasha Volkov over the past 8 months. About the Peninsula Hotel charges. About the property you're purchasing in her name using marital funds. About your business structure and the financial irregularities that your partners don't know about." Michael's face went very still. "I've also spoken with your business partners," I continued. "Well, not directly. My attorney has. I've provided them with documentation of the financial questionable practices within your developments. They're very interested in reviewing your records with their own auditors." "You can't," Michael started. "I also contacted the immigration office about Natasha's work visa status. And her attorney, yes, she has one now, has advised her to cease accepting money from you immediately, as accepting marital assets during a divorce could make her complicit in asset division fraud." Michael stood up. "If you think you're going to." "And finally," I interrupted, "I've hired a forensic accountant who's documented every financial irregularity in your business over the past 5 years. We're prepared to share this with federal authorities unless we reach a settlement that I find acceptable." The color drained from Michael's face. "Catherine, what have you done?" What any rational woman would do when presented with evidence of systematic infidelity and financial fraud. I protected myself and my children. The divorce proceedings were unlike anything Michael had experienced in his carefully controlled life. Rebecca Chen filed the paperwork in a way that froze all of Michael's business accounts and personal finances. She cited financial misconduct, asset concealment, infidelity, and fraud as grounds for the freeze and for requesting temporary control of marital assets. Michael's attorney, a highly paid criminal defense lawyer named Anthony Rossi, immediately filed motions to unfreeze the accounts and challenge the discovery requests. The judge assigned to the case was Margaret Klein, a woman in her 60s who'd been married to an unfaithful businessman once herself. She reviewed Rebecca's motion supporting the freeze, and she approved it immediately. The petitioner has presented prima facie evidence of asset concealment and misuse of marital funds, Judge Klein wrote in her ruling. Until this matter can be fully litigated, all accounts and properties shall remain frozen, and the respondent shall be subject to providing complete financial disclosure. Michael was required to provide complete financial disclosure within 30 days. What was disclosed was devastating. Michael's forensic accounting revealed that he had transferred $680,000 in marital funds to his mistress, used company funds to purchase personal items, art, luxury vehicles, jewelry, run shell companies that obscured the true ownership of properties, used circular financing to create the appearance of legitimate business, income when some income was actually laundered personal funds, failed to report certain assets on his tax filings, been in violation of his partnership agreements by making unauthorized personal use of company resources. The implications were significant. His business partners, once they saw the documentation, immediately demanded a full review of the company's practices. Michael's position as CEO was suspended pending investigation. His business reputation, which had taken 20 years to build, began to crumble in real time. The IRS opened an investigation into his tax filings. His CPA was questioned. His accountant was questioned. Multiple properties were flagged for review. And through it all, I remained calm and collected, prepared to discuss only facts and documentation. The settlement negotiations took 4 months. Michael wanted to negotiate. His attorney suggested various settlement amounts that would allow him to retain control of his business and minimize the legal exposure. Rebecca rejected every single offer. "Your client committed fraud," she said in one mediation session I attended. "He misused marital assets. He concealed financial information from his wife. He's now facing potential criminal investigation. Under those circumstances, my client is entitled to a settlement that reflects not only the marital assets, but also the misconduct involved." "What are you asking for?" Anthony asked, though he already knew. Rebecca had been very clear about the number. 60% of all liquid assets, full ownership of the Upper East Side penthouse, the house in the Hamptons, the vacation property in Aspen, full custody of both minor children, with Michael having supervised visitation pending the results of his tax investigation, child support of $8,000 per month, spousal support of $15,000 per month for 10 years. And a clause prohibiting Michael from contacting Catherine's parents or attempting to damage her professional reputation. Michael's face turned red. "That's excessive. That's not what the law allows." "The law allows for equitable distribution of marital assets," Rebecca interrupted. "What the law also allows for is consideration of misconduct, and the misconduct in this case is substantial." The negotiations went back and forth for months. In October 2023, Michael finally accepted a settlement that was only slightly less generous than Rebecca's original demand. 55% of liquid assets, $2.8 million of $5.1 million. Full ownership of the Upper East Side penthouse, the Hamptons house, the Aspen property, primary custody of Michael Jr., and Emma with Michael having visitation every other weekend, not supervised, but Michael's tax investigation would make him reluctant to travel anyway. Child support of $7,000 per month. Spousal support of $12,000 per month for 8 years. Prohibition on Michael contacting Catherine's family or attempting to interfere with her life in any way. Michael also had to provide full disclosure of all assets and finances to the court, cooperate with federal investigators, accept that his position as CEO would remain suspended until the investigation concluded, accept that his professional reputation was now under serious scrutiny. And Natasha, she quietly accepted a payment of $250,000 from Michael in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and disappearing from his life. She returned to Russia 6 months later, Michael's green card sponsorship having been quietly withdrawn. What happened to Michael after the divorce is what interests most people. His business imploded over the next 18 months. Not because I destroyed it, but because the business was built on fraud, and once that fraud was exposed, no one wanted to invest in anything he touched. His partners sued him for his misconduct. He settled for $4 million, money that came directly from his post-settlement assets. The IRS investigation concluded that he owed $890,000 in back taxes, plus penalties and interest. His CPA was convicted of conspiracy to commit tax fraud. Michael wasn't charged criminally. His attorneys negotiated a settlement with the IRS instead, but the damage to his reputation was absolute. He lost clients. He lost partnerships. He lost the respect of the Manhattan real estate community. The name Ashford on buildings became a liability rather than an asset. Several buildings actually removed or diminished his name from their facades. Michael moved to Connecticut with Natasha, but that relationship didn't last. She was attracted to his power and his money, and once both were gone, she left him for a hedge fund manager in Stamford. Michael married again 2 years after our divorce, a woman named Jennifer who made the mistake of believing his story that he was a victim of a vindictive ex-wife. That marriage lasted 14 months before Jennifer discovered that Michael was incapable of fidelity and left him as well. The last I heard, Michael was living in a modest house in Westchester, consulting for smaller real estate firms and driving himself to work in a Tesla instead of having a driver. He was financially stable but no longer wealthy. He was professionally active but no longer significant. He'd become ordinary. And for a man like Michael, who defined himself entirely through power and status, becoming ordinary was perhaps a worse punishment than any legal system could have imposed. For me, the aftermath was complicated. I'd won. Legally, financially, strategically, I'd won completely. I'd protected my children. I'd ensured my financial security. I'd dismantled a man's empire and exposed his fraud. I'd proven that intelligence and documentation could defeat arrogance and assumption. But I'd also discovered something about myself that I wasn't sure how to process. I'd spent 15 years erasing myself to maintain a marriage to a man who'd never truly seen me as real. And when I finally stopped erasing myself, when I finally leveraged my intelligence and capability, I discovered that I was capable of things I didn't particularly want to be capable of. I could orchestrate someone's professional destruction. I could use information as a weapon. I could plan vengeance with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. The question was, who was I if that's what I was capable of? My therapist, Dr. Sarah Matthews, asked me that directly in one of our sessions 3 months after the divorce was finalized. "You did what you needed to do to protect yourself and your children," she said. "That was legitimate. But now you're grappling with the fact that you're capable of ruthlessness, and that capability frightens you." "It does," I admitted. "When I look back at how I planned everything, how I documented his every move, how I coordinated with lawyers and accountants to build a case that would destroy him, I don't recognize myself." "Maybe," Dr. Matthews suggested, "you're finally recognizing yourself for the first time. Maybe the person you were before wasn't really you. Maybe that was the performance." That shifted something in my perspective. The woman I'd been for 15 years, the decorative wife, the compliant partner, the person who erased herself to maintain someone else's image, that wasn't my authentic self. That was a performance I'd given because I thought it was what I was supposed to do. The woman who documented fraud, coordinated with lawyers, and strategically dismantled her husband's empire, that wasn't a stranger. That was the person I'd always been underneath the performance. And that person was capable of both ruthlessness and protection, both strategic planning and genuine care, both intelligence and intuition. That person was me. The real transformation began when I stopped thinking about Michael and started thinking about myself. I'd kept the Upper East Side penthouse, but I redecorated it completely. Gone were the careful, neutral tones designed to complement Michael's image. In came colors and designs that I actually loved. Bold, intentional, unapologetically me. I hired a career coach and started building a design business again, not as a hobby, but as a serious professional endeavor. I took on clients. I won awards. Within 2 years, I had a team of 4 designers working with me, and we were getting write-ups in design magazines. I went back to school and got a degree in architectural design. I took courses in business management and financial literacy. I learned about investments and real estate from a position of knowledge rather than dependence. Most importantly, I invested time in my children and helped them process what had happened. Michael Jr. was 13 when the divorce happened, old enough to understand that his father had been unfaithful, old enough to feel betrayed, old enough to initially blame me for breaking up the family. We went to family therapy together, and slowly, he came to understand that I hadn't broken the family. Michael's choices had broken the family, and my choices had protected what could be protected. Emma was 11, young enough that she primarily wanted her mother, old enough to understand that her father had done something wrong. She became very close to me during those years, and I made sure she understood that my protection of myself and my interests wasn't selfish. It was necessary. It was survival. Both kids eventually developed more complex relationships with their father. They loved him. He was still their father, but they no longer idealized him. They understood that people could be both loving and flawed, both accomplished and dishonest, both present and absent. 3 years after my divorce from Michael was finalized, I was invited to speak at a women's business conference about financial independence and protecting yourself in marriage. I almost turned it down. I wasn't interested in becoming a cautionary tale or a victim narrative speaker. But the conference organizer, a woman named Victoria Chen, who'd also been through a contentious divorce, convinced me that my story mattered because it wasn't a story about being victimized. It was a story about recognizing your own power. I stood in front of 300 women and told them, I spent 15 years believing that the role I played was the identity I had. I was someone's wife. I was someone's mother. I was someone's accessory. And when that role was no longer available, I had to figure out who I was underneath the performance. What I learned is that the skills you develop to navigate a relationship, the observation, the intuition, the ability to read situations, those aren't skills unique to being a wife. They're skills that transfer to every aspect of your life. What I also learned is that financial knowledge isn't threatening. It's liberating. When I understood my family's finances, really understood them, not in the surface way I'd been understanding them, I understood power. And once I understood power, I could protect myself. And most importantly, I learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish. Documenting your reality isn't paranoid. Preparing for the worst-case scenario isn't pessimistic. It's prudent. It's smart. It's the difference between being victimized and being a survivor. The response was overwhelming. Women came up to me afterward with their own stories, their own concerns, their own need to understand how to protect themselves in relationships that felt increasingly uncertain. Within a year, I'd started a nonprofit organization called Clarity, designed to help women understand their finances, their legal rights, and how to protect themselves if relationships go wrong. We offered free consultations with divorce attorneys. We taught financial literacy workshops. We helped women document situations that needed documentation. It wasn't revenge, it was prevention. By year 5 after my divorce, my life looked completely different from how it had looked during my marriage. I was running a successful design business with a team of talented designers. I was running a nonprofit that had helped over 800 women protect themselves and their children. I had a strong relationship with my children, both of whom understood that their mother was a person with her own identity and ambitions. I'd also started dating again. Not seriously at first, then more seriously with a man named David who was a therapist and understood that I needed a partner, not a performance partner. Someone who saw me as a full person, not as decoration. Michael Jr., now 18, was applying to colleges with the understanding that he wanted to study business and eventually work in real estate development, but ethically. He'd learned from watching his father what happens when ethics are compromised. Emma, now 16, was passionate about advocacy and wanted to study law. She'd watched me stand up for myself, and she wanted to do that for others. Both of my children understood that their mother had been willing to fight for them, to document the truth, to protect what mattered. They understood that protective action wasn't cruelty, it was love. And me, I understood that the person I'd been, the person who could document fraud, coordinate with lawyers, strategically dismantle a false empire, that person wasn't a monster. That person was someone who could think clearly under pressure, who could gather information, who could plan for protection, who could refuse to be victimized. That person was someone I could respect. The last time I saw Michael was completely accidental. I was at a restaurant with David, and Michael walked in with Jennifer, his second wife. The hedge fund manager hadn't worked out, and they'd reconciled briefly. He didn't approach me, but I watched him across the room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt, just the neutral observation of a stranger who'd once been significant and no longer was. After dinner, as we were leaving, Michael caught my eye. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement. I nodded back. No words were necessary. We both understood what had happened. He'd gambled on his power and his charm and his assumption that I would never truly stand up for myself. He'd lost that gamble. I'd won. And now we were both moving on. That night, I called my father, the lawyer who'd taught me to follow the money and document the truth. I wanted to thank you, I said, for teaching me to protect myself. It's taken me a long time to understand that the skills you taught me, documentation, strategic thinking, following information trails, those aren't paranoid. They're prudent. My father was quiet for a moment. Catherine, I taught you those things because I wanted you to never be powerless. I never wanted you to be dependent on anyone for your understanding of your own life. I'm glad you learned that lesson, even if it took a difficult situation to teach it. I'm using those lessons to help other women now, I said. Through my nonprofit, I'm teaching them financial literacy, documentation skills, how to understand their legal rights. I'm helping them not be blindsided the way I was. That's the best use of those skills, my father replied. 5 years after my divorce from Michael, I received an invitation to a gala benefiting my nonprofit organization. The gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, hosted by some of the most powerful women in Manhattan. Women CEOs, women investors, women who'd built their own empires rather than decorating someone else's. I walked in wearing a dress I'd designed myself, bold, elegant, unapologetically me, and I felt something I hadn't felt during my marriage. I felt like myself. Rebecca Chen, my divorce attorney, was there. Dr. Patricia Lin, my forensic accountant, was there. Sandra Wu, my private investigator, was there. They'd all become friends, bonded by the experience of helping me dismantle a false empire and rebuild myself. My children were there. Michael Jr., now in his 3rd year of business school, and Emma, now in her 1st year of law school. Even David was there, my partner, who understood that I was a complete person with my own power and my own identity. And as I stood at that gala, looking out at the community I'd built and the people who'd helped me find my strength, I thought about the woman I'd been. The woman who'd spent 15 years performing a role, erasing herself, accepting mistreatment because she thought that was the price of security. That woman had thought her husband's power was the source of her safety. What I'd learned was that the only power that ever truly protected me was my own. The power to observe, to document, to plan, to protect, to refuse to be victimized. The power to know myself and claim myself and refuse to disappear anymore. And that power, once claimed, could never be taken away. The moment she realized he'd underestimated her intelligence was the moment she took back her life. If this story of a woman who documented the truth and reclaimed her power resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories of women who refuse to be invisible. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. And if you or someone you know needs resources about financial independence or divorce protection, visit the Clarity nonprofit website, link in the description. Don't miss more stories of women who turn their pain into power. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.